Hello everyone and welcome to this video. In this video, we're going to be closing up or tying up the arbitrary file upload vulnerability section of this course. And we're going to be doing that by taking a look at a practical example of identifying and exploiting an arbitrary file upload vulnerability in a real-world web application. And in this case, the real-world web application is WordPress. So this video will encapsulate pretty much most or all of what we have learned thus far in this section, and will require some nifty tricks. And the objective here is to again give you a glimpse as to what this type of vulnerability looks like in the wild, as well as the techniques and tools you can utilize to essentially, bypass any upload filters if there are any, and get whatever web shell that you want or whatever script that you want executed on the server side to consequently provide you with remote code execution. So this particular video has a lab environment attached or associated with it. And this lab environment will be different than the others that we have utilized within this section. The only similarity is that you will not be provided with a Kali Linux system. So once you fire up the lab, you'll just be presented with a link that'll take you to the actual WordPress site. And from that point on, you can use that, or you can pretty much copy the link into your own Kali Linux system because the web app is running on the internet. So you will require a Kali Linux system or a penetration testing distribution in order to go through this particular lab. The lab also has documentation, so you can go through it at your own pace or at your own time. If you choose to go through the video first, that's perfectly fine. So what I'm going to do is start up the lab environment, and I'm going to switch over into my Kali Linux system, and I'll see you there. All right, so I am back within my Kali Linux system, and as you can see, I've just opened up the link that was provided to me by the lab, or once I started up the lab, and as you can see, the URL points to a WordPress website, and this WordPress website has a file upload vulnerability somewhere. And I'm going to be giving you a methodology, at least in this case, that'll, help you identify the file upload vulnerability and then consequently move on to actually getting whatever file we want uploaded onto the actual web server. And as I said, it doesn't really matter what type of file you want to upload as long as you can get it uploaded. That's really the objective here, but it would be very useful if we could upload a file or a script that could provide us with at least remote code execution. So given that this is a CMS, in this case, we're dealing with WordPress, I usually like starting off by performing a little bit of enumeration to see, whether we have directory listing enabled, which is always useful and is actually mandatory in the case of WordPress because all files get stored in a centralized uploads directory. And if we cannot access that uploads directory publicly, or if that directory does not have directory listing set up or configured, then it'll be very difficult to get our PHP script, for example, to execute because we can't, make a request to it because the asset or the resource is not publicly displayable or indexable. But of course, if you do know the actual file name, then you can directly point to that resource, and in most cases, that usually works. So I'll just copy the URL here, and I'll open up my terminal. And what I'll do is I will say WordPress scan URL, and we're not going to use the vulnerability scanning functionality of WordPress scan. We just want to perform a general scan on the WordPress site to see what's going on. So this will take a couple of seconds. No, I do not want to update the database. So let's see what results we get. So you can see it resolves the domain to the IP address successfully, and looks like it's enumerated the version of WordPress as well as the theme and now the plugins. All right, so looks like we have a very interesting plugin here called wpStoreCart or wpStoreCart, and we can't find anything else. But if we take a look at the results, you can see we've identified the theme as well as the version of WordPress right over here. We can also see that WordPress cron is enabled, and there we are. Fantastic. So directory listing is also enabled here. So in WordPress, as you already know or probably know, the uploads are stored under WordPress content in a folder called uploads. And generally speaking, if the WordPress site has been configured securely, the uploads directory is not publicly accessible unless you actually are specifying the URL to a specific resource or a file within that uploads folder. So I'll go ahead and open this up in my browser just to verify that directory listing is enabled, and indeed it is. And very, very interesting, we can see that we have what appears to be a folder that belongs to one of the plugins, or rather the only plugin that is installed on the WordPress site, and that is the WP or wpStoreCart plugin. All right, so if we take a look at it here, and we go into the results here, you can see plugins identified, wpStoreCart. So I'm just going to copy that plugin name here. And before we do anything, let's try and open up the folder to see if we can access it. Indeed, we can. And as you already know, WordPress is based on PHP. And right over here, we can see that because this web server does not have, or rather has the server banners enabled, we're able to enumerate the version of Apache that is running. So we can perform a quick vulnerability search or a quick search for exploits using searchsploit, which is the command line utility or the local version of exploitdb. And searchsploit is the tool that allows you to search for exploits based on, like for example, the name of a particular piece of software, or in this case, a WordPress plugin. So let me just type in searchsploit correctly here. So I'm just going to say searchsploit and I'll hit enter now. And there we are. All right. So what do we have here? So we have WordPress plugin, wpStoreCart 2.5.27 to 2.5.29 arbitrary file upload. Fantastic. So that's exactly what we were looking for. And in this case, it looks like 2.5.29 is the version that is installed, and that's 100% confidence here. And that's exactly the within the range of versions that this particular exploit can target or can work successfully on. So you can see that it is a PHP exploit, which is quite weird, but nonetheless, let's take a look at it and let's see what exactly is going on. So I'll navigate onto my desktop here because I want to copy that exploit. So I'll just say, in this particular case, copy user share exploitdb exploits, and the path is then PHP web apps. And we then want to go into, or we want to copy 190 23 so 23.php, and I'm just going to copy it to my desktop here, and there we are. We can see we have it right over here. So now I'm just going to open it up with Vim. You can use any other text editor you want. So I'll say 190 23.php, and let's see what exactly is going on here. So description: WordPress plugins, wpStoreCart arbitrary file upload vulnerability, and this is where the plugin can be downloaded. As well as additional information regarding the author. So this is the exploit here. So in this case, I believe, this is a PHP exploit, which is fine. In terms of what is going on, there's not much documentation, and there just seems to be a POC or a proof of concept. So the exploit, this is the name of the exploit file, postshell.php. Based on the actual name, it looks like it's using the post HTTP method to actually upload the file, which makes sense. But where is the vulnerable endpoint? So the vulnerable endpoint seems to be under WordPress, WordPress content, plugins, wpStoreCart, PHP, upload.php. Okay, that's quite interesting. So in fact, I think for better visibility, and so we can sort of play around with this script a little bit, let's open up the script in a I'm going to open it up in LeafPad here just because, or sorry, Mousepad, not LeafPad. But if we actually copy this particular path here and we try and see whether we can access it on the actual WordPress site here. So I'll just append it to the end here. There we are, and we'll hit enter. It looks like, yes, we can perform some form of upload here. So going back to the script and sort of understanding what's going on, we can see that there is a variable called upload file, and this is the value of this is set to lo.php. If we go to the bottom, we can see that lo.php is the actual PHP script that is to be uploaded on the actual web server. So in essence, this is pretty much, we can pretty much take this and modify it and utilize our own shell or our own, PHP script that we want to upload, like, for example, the one that we had used previously, that we had created and utilized in the other examples or the other videos in this section, the basic command injection PHP script here. We can pretty much just specify the path to that script. And if it's stored on the desktop in PHP, we would still need to specify the absolute path. But what's interesting here is I can see that, okay, so we're using curl to make the request with PHP, and we would need to modify this entire URL here, which we actually have now. So I'll just copy that there, and we'll just replace it here. So pretty much just need to make sure that it points to upload.php under wpStoreCart php upload.php. And indeed, there we are. So we replace it with the actual target URL. And then you can see, because this is using curl, this script says right over here, so curl set options, pretty much run curl init here, because that's the actual function. The curl option post fields, and in this case, no post fields have been set. So comma array is file data, and that's equal to the actual PHP script that we want to upload. So it's pulling the actual variable there, which is, that makes sense. And then curl set options, curl option return transfer is set to 1. And then the post result variable is equal to curl exec, and the function is run again. So curl init is run again, and then curl close, and then print post result. Okay, so this is fairly simple to understand. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this, because this is the actual exploit that will upload or will perform the arbitrary file upload for us. Because one of the things you need to understand, and this is why I really like this particular example, is when you talk about arbitrary file uploads, you're not necessarily going to be dealing with upload forms all the time. You may have endpoints like this, upload.php, which work very, very weirdly in terms of not being standardized in their functionality. So in this case, we would just need to make a direct post with curl or any other utility, and pretty much specify that we want to upload a file, and it would be uploaded into this particular directory right over here. So WordPress content uploads, wpStoreCart, and this is where the shell or the PHP script would be uploaded to. And then we could just navigate to it. And then again, in our case, if we upload the shell.php script that we created, it would just, provide us with command injection via the actual parameter value as sent in a standard GET request. So as I said, I will copy this here, and we'll first need to test it, and I'll show you how to run a PHP exploit or script locally on Kali. You just need to make sure you have PHP installed. So I'll paste this in here, and I'm going to save this on my desktop now, and I'm going to save it as exploit.php, and I'm just going to make sure that this is set to all files here. There we are, so save that. So there's a couple of interesting things that I want to modify. So firstly, on my desktop, you can see that I have shell.php. So that's what we want to upload, right? Or that's what we want this particular script or this exploit to upload. So we are going to change this and specify the absolute path. So home, Kali, desktop, shell.php. And in terms of anything else that we need to configure, it doesn't look like we do. File data seems to be the actual, that's very interesting. So file data, if we take a look at the original exploit, it doesn't provide any context as to what that is about, but it looks like if we reload that particular URL, so no upload found in files for file data. Okay, so there's a variable called files for file data. That's quite interesting. I'm not too sure what that is all about. You know, I mean, it's pretty straightforward in terms of what we need to do now. We just know that that is some sort of, most likely a header. And of course, we can utilize burp to try and analyze that. But again, I'm not entirely sure now, but that's never a bad thing. So the bottom line is to test whether the exploit is working. We want to refresh this particular directory to see whether the actual script or the PHP file that we've specified to be uploaded has been uploaded. So we'll go back into the actual exploit.php file here, or the actual exploit script, and let's save it. Let's actually save it and let's run it. So first things first, within my desktop here in my terminal, I'm just going to give it executable permissions. So chmod +x exploit.php. And you also want to make sure you have PHP installed. So sudo apt-get install PHP. And also, you also want to make sure you have PHP. So for example, because this is using curl, you want to make sure you have PHP curl installed, which is always a good idea. So it looks like I have installed that. So now we can say php file exploit.php. Okay, so we get the same response with the alert box here via JavaScript saying no upload found in files for file data. Okay, so I think this is pointing to the actual, this is what is referring to here. Okay, and of course I can perform a little bit more research, but it looks like we're having a bit of an error, and I think I know what the error is. This looks like it's fairly old. This exploit was released or made public in 2012, which actually makes sense. In newer versions of PHP, you need to specify, or this is actually the incorrect way of specifying a path to a file that is to be uploaded. So in essence, what we need to do here is we need to modify this segment here. So we're pretty much just going to get rid of all of this to this point here. And after this, we will need to utilize curl file create, and we would then put in the actual variable that contains the path to the file that we would like to upload. In this case, it's upload file. So I'll just say upload file. And we created a parenthesis there. So I'm also going to close that up there. So let me see, this bracket belongs to that parenthesis there. Okay. Interesting. So we can see that, yes, the curl option post is set to true, which is very important. And I'm not sure whether we need to modify anything else. So I'm going to save that. And let's try and run the exploit now. Okay, that ran without any errors. So fingers crossed, let's reload the page. And fantastic. So we were successfully able to identify and, of course, then, exploit the arbitrary file upload vulnerability, but we still need to see whether this PHP script is going to be executed by the web server. So I'll click on it here, and that's no reason for alarm. Remember, we need to pass in the parameter cmd, and then the value is a system command. So we can say ID, and fantastic. There we are. So we get remote code execution via command injection, and we currently have have the permissions or the privileges associated with the www data user, and that's because, again, web servers typically on Linux run under that particular context. So I can say, for example, ls, and that is going to display the contents within this directory here. So app, WordPress content, uploads, WordPress StoreCart. If I try and display, like, for example, the root directory here, okay, so it looks like we have some very interesting scripts here. But if I change this and say ls, so sorry, let me just change this to var www html. Yeah, so that's the directory being used by WordPress. So this is where WordPress is installed. And in this particular case, let's check the permissions for these files, because we could read the WordPress config.php file and get the root passwords. So let's see, for some reason that did not work. There we are. So Okay, so in this particular case, we wouldn't be able to access or read the WordPress config file, which is perfectly fine. And now let's try and play around a little bit with this exploit. Just a couple more tweaks here I think will be very useful. So what if we want to use the Weavely, like a Weavely shell? So we can create a Weavely shell, sort of like a backdoor. And I'll say, Weavely, I've already covered how to use this. It just generates a very cool backdoor that you can password protect, so that even if someone finds it, they'll not be able to interact with it. So let's say a system administrator finds this weird PHP script, they won't know, firstly what it's all about. Of course, if they analyze the content, they'll know that it's being used for command injection. But if they try to access it or get it to be executed, it'll require the password, which is one of the great things that we can do with Weavely. And more importantly, it's always recommended, if you're setting up a web shell or a backdoor on a web server, to give it a name that doesn't stick out. So for example, I can say, Weavely generate, and we'll provide it with a password like password. Again, I'm keeping it simple, and I want to save this on my desktop, and we're going to call this something like login.php, right? All right, so it's generated that for us. And if we now cat out the contents of that Weavely script, you can see that it encodes everything, so that even if someone finds it, like a system administrator, it's very difficult to tell what this is doing. Of course, you can perform more research on Weavely to understand what type of encoding and obfuscation is being performed here. But you can see that it's standard character substitution, renaming of variables, playing around, so on and so forth. And of course, the password, the bottom line is that the password decrypts this, or essentially allows you to access it. So it still is a PHP script. So what we can do now is modify the exploit to actually use that, and we'll just say replace this with login.php, and we know that the exploit script works, so we just need to run it again with PHP. I'll just hit enter. There we are. And now if we go back to the uploads directory and we click on login.php, that will not work because we need to copy the path to that URL and use it with Weavely. So we say Weavely, paste in the URL, and then put in the password, and this will give us a shell session. So there we are. So this is the target, this is the session, and then of course we can always bring up the help menu to see what we can do. So in terms of what Weavely is designed to do, there's quite a lot it can do. So you can see that we have the ability to create tar archives or tarballs, if you will. We can also upload a file via Weavely, so bypassing that file upload vulnerability. We can also read the remote file from the remote file system, download a file or download a URL, copy a single file. There's a ton of stuff that Weavely gives you access to. And of course, we can also utilize commands like, for example, let's see, system info, right? So we can say system info, hit enter. We'll give this a couple of seconds. All right, there we are. We can see that we get the system info. So you can see the document root, the who am I, the host name, our current working directory, safe mode, the current script. So what's being executed, the script folder, uname A. So we know it's running Linux, the internal IP address, the max execution time, so on and so forth. And then of course, we can run standard commands, Linux commands here. So for example, let's see if the environment command works. There we are. So we get the environment variables, and we can cat the contents of etc password here. There we are. Fantastic. And you can see that all of this is working as expected. So that is pretty much it in terms of the exploit. And we can pretty much replicate this with curl manually in the actual terminal. And the way we can do this, and again, I'm just doing this just to test it out, because this exploit is quite old and requires some modification. It actually defeats the purpose, because this, I understand, like, it makes it simpler, but you can easily automate what it's doing here just by running curl in the actual terminal. So what you would do essentially, or in essence, is like so. I'm going to terminate that shell session there, and I'm just going to copy login.php to, we'll just call it test.php, because that's what I'm going to try and upload. And we don't want to upload a file with the same name that will sort of conflict with a file that already exists on the web server. And just to verify that this will work, we can say curl, and because we're uploading a file, we say file, and then we specify file data, which is what needs to be specified. And then we can say that that's going to be equal to, we can say, for example, a, and in this case, we would just say test.php. So test.php, and then we would put in the URL where we can actually make the upload. So right over here, and that should work without any issues. So if I just paste that in here and I hit enter, that looks like it worked. So if we go back to the actual WordPress content uploads directory, and under wpStoreCart, we should have test.php in there. And indeed we do. And this is the standard command injection script we created. So I'm going to say cmd equals id. And oh, interesting. So that, so test.php cmd equals id. That's weird. For some reason, it's not executing or is not giving us any results here. So let me just see the contents of test.php here, just to make sure it is working correctly. Okay, so that uploaded the actual Weavly shell. So it would pretty much be the same process in terms of connecting. So we would just say with Weavly connect there, and we would change this to, test.php. There we are, and we get the session. I can just type in ls, and that'll start the connection, and we now get a proper session. So if I say ifconfig, there we are. So working perfectly. So you can use both techniques. I think the script is a little bit convoluted here for my liking, because you can easily you could have easily done what the script does with curl, but I wanted to show you how to do it with the script, I think, before I showed you how to do it with curl, because exploits, you usually find this quite a lot with publicly available exploits. They may require tweaking, especially if they are old and the, let's say the language that they were developed in is now outdated. You may need to change a lot of the syntax. A good example of this is, Python 2 exploits, which can be quite hard to actually get to work correctly. With that being said, that's going to conclude the practical demonstration side of this video. All right, so that was how to identify and exploit a arbitrary file upload vulnerability in WordPress. I hope you enjoyed that session and learned a lot from it in terms of the methodology to use. We covered quite a lot and pretty much encapsulated or covered most of what we learned in this section, with the exception of bespoke file upload extension filters, which again in this particular case would not really apply given the way the endpoint worked. The endpoint being the actual upload.php script that was facilitating the uploads. But you can see that you're never going to be, dealing with a familiar or a common type of upload form that makes sense initially. So it's always important that you keep performing tests. As you saw with the example that I sort of highlighted around modifying the exploit script, you can always get it to work if you understand exactly what's going on. And of course, definitely try this out for yourself, and hopefully this sort of encapsulated arbitrary file uploads as realistically as possible. And that brings us to the end of the arbitrary file upload section of this course. We're now going to be moving to the next section of the course, where we'll be exploring directory or path traversal vulnerabilities, and of course how to identify them and how to exploit them. With that being said, that's going to be it for this video, and I'll be seeing you in the next section.